but I don't have time for games. I'm on the hunt.
Sure is a lot of Star Wars out there. I feel like every time I get a haircut, there's some important thing you're supposed to engage with. And it's all cross-media now, so you never know where that thing is gonna be. Is it a TV show this time? A book? A comic? Oh, hey, they're announcing more movies. I feel like I'm drowning in Star Wars. Official content, fan content, merchandise. It surrounds us, binds us, certainly penetrates us. Aspyr, the people who want you to remember that they aren't just about porting old games to new hardware, have ported an old game to new hardware. And guess what? It's another Star Wars! Star Wars Bounty Hunter is a third-person action-adventure game originally released in 2002, meant to tie in with the then-upcoming Star Wars Episode II Attack of the Clones. Players step into the Durasteel boots of, surprise, a bounty hunter named Jango Fett. The game follows Jango's quest to capture a highly lucrative bounty and sets up his involvement with the cloning program that Obi-Wan Kenobi discovers in the movie. It also ties into a comic book story about Jango's history, featuring his personal vendetta against a fellow Mandalorian. It also features the debut of Zam Wesell, a character who will definitely be super important to the future of the series, and you should certainly pay great attention to. I've not played the re-release of Bounty Hunter, and some of my critiques here may be addressed by it. I don't know, because I'm not the sort of media personality that gets sent preview codes. But this game came out in 2002, and I still have my copy from that time, so I decided to give it a whirl and see if there was a game in there worth remastering. Or, you know, if it was more of a case of we have the rights to do these ports and we haven't done Bounty Hunter yet. Ooh, it's Progressive Scan compatible. Which will it be? You don't know, but you will if you watch the whole video. Wink. Anyway, let's talk about how this game plays. Hey, remember Boba Fett? Everybody's favorite background extra that was forced into being a meaningful character? Because dorks thought a silent loser who shot his gun twice, missed both times, then fell in a pit and died just looked really cool? Well, now you're his dad. His very important, super interesting dad. They made clones out of him. That's cool, right? Bounty hunters in Star Wars are a common enough character archetype that you can draw from that well pretty freely. It's nice to experience a life in the Star Wars universe that isn't defined by one's connection to the Force or a specific weird philosophy that's hammered into them from childhood. A bounty hunter is just a person out trying to get paid, making their way in the world today, which takes everything you've got. It's relatable in a way magic space monks kinda never can be, or at least can't without some real heavy lifting. Bounty hunters are closer to the human baseline you and I are at, mainly because they don't have superpowers. Instead, they have to rely on gadgets and cunning to succeed in whatever situation the writers have decided to throw them into this time. The central pieces of Jango Fett's arsenal are his dual-wielded space pistols and a jetpack. He has a lot of toys, but the game makes those two parts of his kit more useful than anything else. Sub-weapons might have specific use cases, but oftentimes they fall short of your regular blasters in terms of versatility and damage potential. Yes, there's an insta-kill dart that works on most normal enemies, but do you really want to stop, enter an aiming mode, target the enemy, and then fire? Or would you rather fill your hands and go in blasting with dual pistols? I know what my answer is, and it's the one that involves way less screwing around and way more shooting dudes. On top of that, the pistols have a lot more usefulness as damage dealers once you realize that they fire as fast as you can press the firing button. This isn't really spelled out in the game anywhere. Maybe it's in the manual, but I bought this in a GameStop in 2006, so I'm lucky it has a box. But if you can really mash on that sucker, you're capable of so much destruction in Bounty Hunter. Here you can see me kind of figuring it out in a combat encounter, a moment which influenced the rest of my playthrough. Why would I swap to the dumb darts or clumsy grenades when I was trained to kill by Mario Party? But that's not to say the game feels bad, or that Jango's central tools can't carry a game for 6 hours. On the contrary, the pistols and jetpack allow for the kind of game I really needed to play right now. A middling reception, not important game that you can play all the way through in a weekend. Bounty Hunter doesn't force you to master its mechanics to finish the game, nor does it even really require you to engage with some of them at all. But more on that later. Bounty Hunter feels like a game where the central movement mechanics were what they came up with first, and the rest of it followed after. I mean this is high praise, because some of my all-time faves were made that way. I think they wanted to make a game that was fun, first and foremost, even if the additional dressing ended up falling short. But man, you ever play a game and just kind of find yourself messing around in it more than you are progressing? I did that in Bounty Hunter. There are a lot of big rooms that allow for vertical movement or bypassing sections of combat altogether. It could feel cheap, but I found the experience satisfying. Like, my reward for being experimental was that I got to skip combat sections. When most of that combat boils down to, can you press the A button fast enough to not die? That's a pretty good reward. There are times when your jetpack antics will get you into trouble, and sometimes the game gets glitchy when you're really starting to push your luck, but I have this sneaking suspicion that the developers had a good handle on how players were gonna try to use the jetpack. Look at this death here, and tell me that that pit was not specifically designed to catch people just trying to jet across these bridges. It's frustrating, but I chuckled the one time it got me. I was able to chuckle because, well, I was playing my GameCube copy through Dolphin and had access to save states. Otherwise, Bounty Hunter has a continue system that allows you to pick up from a checkpoint 5 times per level before having to start the whole thing over. Back in the day, this is how a 6-hour game would keep you invested in it for longer periods of time. You had to really get your gameplay down if you were going to finish something with a limiting system like this. Thanks to modern technology, I only had to suffer this crushing feeling once before I realized that I needed the save states to save myself from a migraine or 5. I'm curious to see how the remaster handles this specifically. Will they leave the continue system intact, or will they rework it? Maybe they'll go so far as to remove it entirely and allow the player to continue from their last checkpoint indefinitely. Personally, that's how I'd do it. I think the game is difficult enough without needing to force players backwards as punishment for not getting it quickly enough. I think we're better off leaving some of the ancient ways behind, is all. Something I couldn't stop thinking as I played was that this game has great speedrunning potential thanks to how fun it is to master the jetpack's movement capabilities. When I went to check out the leaderboards on speedrun.com though, I was super disappointed. There are only 5 runs for each version of Bounty Hunter. Maybe the remaster will open that up to more people. I certainly hope so. I don't think it's out of pocket to say that Bounty Hunter makes Jango Fett's movement fun to control. With all the glitchiness I ran into thrown into the mix, I can't help but feel there's something here that could lead to interesting runs should anyone want to take up the gauntlet. It won't be me. I mean, I had to use save states. I'm not putting myself through that kind of commitment. I just got out of an extended relationship and I'm not ready for that. And another thing, remember when I said Bounty Hunter doesn't force you to engage with all of its systems? Nor does it even really require you to engage with some of them at all. But more on that later. Good times. If you were wondering what part of Star Wars Bounty Hunter I was specifically referring to there, worry no longer. It's the bounty hunting. Throughout each level, there are characters both hostile and not that have bounties on their heads. Jango can scan them and claim the bounty, then choose to do so by capturing them alive with his silly string or just straight murking those fools. Usually, you'll get more credits for an alive bounty, but not always. There's at least one bounty in the game that doesn't offer you anything for bringing them in alive, requiring you to kill them. There's a tiny bit of lore attached to each bounty. Text on your Metroid Prime visor will pop up when you locate a bounty target, telling you what they did and who placed the bounty on their head. It's fun, but never more than flavor. I don't think there's a single optional bounty in the game that even ties into the actual plot. Can't confirm though, because I did not see every optional bounty in the game. After a couple of chapters, I gave up on even looking for them. Bounties are essentially a collectible. Turning in bounties rewards the player with credits, but there's no shop in the game or menus where one can spend this blood money. Instead, an unlockable treat opens up every time you hit a certain threshold of credits earned. That unlockable is concept art. Yay! Look, I know that this stuff is cool and all. You put a lot of work into getting the style of the game down, and it's fair to want people to see it. But when my only reward for engaging with a namesake system in your game is scans of art, that's not much of an incentive. In fact, most of the incentivizing in the game is pretty lame. There are 4 collectibles that unlock in a bonus menu as you progress. The best ones, a comic and these weird bloopers generated by the dev team, are all unlocked just by finishing the game. The other 2 are dependent on capturing all of the bounties alive to earn enough credits, and collecting the one secret hidden in every level. Doing these pretty arduous tasks unlocks concept art and, get this, pretty bad scans of then current Star Wars trading cards. Woo-hoo! I cannot wait to get home from school so I can look at my artifacty JPEG of a Jawa. It's weird. My theory is that all of this stuff came into the picture pretty late in development. Like, they knew they wanted to do the bounties and they knew they wanted to hide secrets, but they didn't decide what you'd get for doing that until it was time to ship. I can envision it clearly. Oh God. What do we have lying around the office that we can give players for engaging fully with our game? I know, character sketches of Roz. Everybody's gonna love Roz. Was that? You got some cards at your desk? Scan them bad boys and put them in the game. We got lunch in an hour. I'm glad that the bloopers aren't hidden behind these systems though, because they're the best unlockable. They're short and weird. Some are trying to be funny and some are just strange shit that game developers came up with in 2001. Some are based on outtakes from the voice acting sessions, some are purely invented. It's a cool reminder that people made this video game, and sometimes a bunch of people working in an office get bored and make their own fun. It's great to see. And I'm in love with this one green screen joke somebody was super eager to make. It includes an unflattering imitation of their Uber boss, George Lucas. Keep in mind, this was 2002, way before it was cool to rag on these movies for being so computery. The bounties themselves are fun, and an extra thing to go for if you're the sort of person who has to do all of the things in your games. But you're not going to get much for bothering. Were this a game not called Star Wars Bounty Hunter, that would make sense. As it is, playing as feared bounty hunter Jango Fett actually hunting bounties is kind of dull and difficult. Especially because some enemies are labeled as bounties, but are thrown at you in a room full of enemies that aren't. You have to go into first person and scan them first, pushing a button to claim the bounty, and you have to do it while they're alive. As the game progresses, levels throw more and more enemies at you. By the end, it's kind of a slog to get through them all if you're not focused on using the jetpack to circumvent them. I felt that way without trying to capture all the bounties. Had I been dedicated to that task, these longer and longer combat sections would become frustrating super quickly. The bounty system is a bust, but it isn't required of you by any stretch. Progression in the game is mainly tied to the story, which we need to talk about. Jango Fett is a pretty blue-collar guy. He drives around in his dead dad's hand-me-down ship, he wears armor crafted with ancient smithing techniques, he drinks his space whiskey straight. It's all part of the bounty hunter lifestyle. Until one day, he gets an invitation from Count Dooku, aka Darth Tyrannus, aka Christopher Lee. The invitation is to hunt down a deadly Jedi who was splintered off from the Order and formed a fanatical cult. The reward? 5 million Republic credits. The girl Watto they came up with to serve as a wizened figure for Jango to have rapport with spells out for us that this would set him up for life. Quick side quest. That girl Watto is named Roz. She has some relevance to the overall plot, but I wanted to take a second to point out that if you peel back a couple decades from that rasp, you'll find the familiar voice of the original Smurfette, Lucille Bliss.
There's a bounty for a death stick dealer on Coruscant.
Yes, it's me, and I feel just like a Smurf.
Nothing else to point out here, but I wanted to make the note. The fanatical cult that Dooku is after is the Bando Gora, and they are detailed so little in the game that I just assumed they had to be from a book or a comic or something else. Turns out, no. This is their first appearance, and all you learn about them is that their leader is a fallen Jedi named Kumari Vosa, that Darth Palpatine wants her dead specifically, and that members of the cult are basically brainwashed zombies. But like, literally, I guess with the Force. Not important. Really, nothing about the Bando Gora is important. They didn't even need to exist for the plot to work, in all honesty. The only named figure in the entire organization is Vosa herself. Everyone else is a grunt. I don't see how it's unreasonable to assume Palpatine, positioning himself to lead a galactic empire, would be threatened by a Dark Jedi not under his influence. Making her a cult leader doesn't add anything to that, other than giving you an excuse to make a cult member model and fill a couple levels with it so the player has faceless enemies to kill. But I digress. Jango is not the only bounty hunter on this hunt. The invitation has been extended to others as part of Dooku's overall plan. See, the Count has two problems. One, the Emperor-to-be needs a blueprint for the clone army he has devised, and two, Kumari Vosa exists. Hiring bounty hunters to take out a Jedi isn't new. It's a proud tradition that goes back at least 4,000 years. But Dooku plans on extending the offer of a higher payout to the victor, using them as the base for the clones. Notably for Jango and the player, another Mandalorian is on the hunt, a ruthless outcast named Montross, voiced by the unmatched Clancy Brown doing his best, "I was the Kurgan."
Only one of us will claim the prize. Vosa's bounty will be mine.
Remember our agreement, Murdoch. The boy is mine.
Montross and Django have history, which you can tell because every time they encounter one another, Montross calls Django old friend. You know, to let us know. The specifics of this don't come up in the game, but they are detailed in the comic book you unlock while playing. It takes beating the game to get the whole picture, but it's satisfying enough, I guess, for something that isn't part of the actual plot. Without reference material, Montross is just an angry baritone looking to get the 5 million ahead of Django. He gets in the way a time or two as a boss to be fought, and that's all the purpose he serves. Not invited on the Vosa hunt is Sam Wessel, who also ends up appearing in Attack of the Clones. You may remember her as the assassin that is hired by Jango Fett to kill Padme, while Django stands nearby and watches. Django kills her with a dart before she can reveal him as the money man, then flies away with his cool jetpack. That's her whole role in the movie, but she's set up in the game to be like a potential love interest for Django? Which is odd because you and I know that he straight kills her later. And not in a second guessing, can I do it, pointing my gun in the air and going, ah, kind of way. It's very much a business thing. It's Django looking out for Django. I don't know. She seems like wasted potential. Django leaves her in a cell on Tatooine, and then somehow she shows up at the end to confront Vosa while she's torturing Django with sexual tension. She gets hurt, and Django carries her like she's a princess as he escapes at the end. Whatever. It's just a really strange tone that her role in the story has considering how it ends. That's sort of the theme with Bounty Hunter's story overall. Wasted potential. It's trying to do too much all at once. It wants to be an important tie-in to Attack of the Clones, and a backstory for Jango Fett, and a revenge story with Montross, and further evidence of Sith manipulation, and a first appearance for Sam Wessel. It's kind of convoluted by the end, and the through line is still as simple as Django needs to kill the evil Jedi. When you do that, the game ends. I think the story would have been better served if it were trying to carry less weight. Most scenes are just Django going from place to place, causing a ruckus and getting one step closer to his quarry. That stuff's all great. There's some fun messing around with the IP too. On Tatooine, you hunt down a gunslinger alien, and it culminates with something that I'd describe as a Star Wars saloon shootout. The tone is exactly what it should be for that too, which is to say it's not overly serious or concerned with its mythology. This was LucasArts after they'd already hit their stride creating additional Star Wars material. They're careful about the lore and locations, trying to place Django's story right in step with the movies. It works, mostly. Some of the camera work and cutscene design feels like it would be at home in a lower budget Star Wars project, which compared to a movie, this absolutely was. It isn't to the level of your Jedi Fallen Orders of the world, but considering this was 2002 and the consoles it released on had only been at market for like a year, it's got some great presentation. It comes across as cinematic without being artsy. Good old-fashioned schlock, which, hey, I'm all about. It's just that the plot driving it along isn't anything special. It needs tightening up in what I think are very apparent ways, cutting down on cruft and focusing on the central characters. It needed less Bando Gora and more Komari Vosa. It needed less Montross and more Zam. I'm sure part of the challenge in writing this thing was coming up with a plot that convincingly moved you from planet to planet and objective to objective without getting dull. It's a hard thing to do, especially if you're coming from a screenwriting background. Did the writers come from that background? Not really. The narrative lead, Hayden Blackman, had worked on previous Star Wars games at LucasArts in that same capacity. Why does Bounty Hunter have this unfocused writing when those games don't? I'm not sure, but I'd wager it had something to do with needing to come out within a very specific window as a tie-in for Attack of the Clones. Is this accurate? I don't know. I'm not a journalist. The story of Bounty Hunter isn't particularly special, but it's still a fun romp. You'll see several Star Wars planets and feel like you're in Django's shoes as you go. There aren't any big surprises in store, no twists or turns to keep you on your toes. It's just a story about how Django got picked to be the clone guy. It does that well enough, though it doesn't take a satisfactory route getting there as far as all these subplots are concerned. So, is Star Wars Bounty Hunter a good game? Mostly. It's fun to play, and that's the most important thing. I think script revision would serve Bounty Hunter really well, probably better than anything else. But I know that's not the sort of thing you get in a remaster. The resources required to rebuild the story of a game to be more focused aren't realistic for a simple re-release. Which sucks, because, well, it'd make the game better. Polishing up some movement bugs and adding widescreen is nice, which I'm sure Aspyr has got covered. But that's not really going to make Bounty Hunter worth buying again if you already have access to it. I mean, look, the game is very playable on the two major emulators out right now that cover its original release systems. If you play the PS2 version, there are even retro achievements you can earn, something I wish I'd realized before committing to the GameCube release. But hey, that's the one I have to play. To answer my facetious question from before, is Bounty Hunter worth remastering? Yeah, I think so. There's a pretty solid game in there, despite its flaws. It's worth playing if you like this era of straightforward action-adventure games, or Star Wars, or even if you're just a LucasArts person. It's great that it's coming out on newer systems so more people can play it. That is, without having to learn how emulators work, or summoning the ancient magics required to get a GameCube to not look like shit on a modern television. It takes a little patience to get the hang of, and might stretch a bit in the back half, but that movement is fun, and it's cool to just be a badass space bounty hunter for a few hours. The game delivers on that promise, which, it could be argued, is the most critical one it could have. Star Wars Bounty Hunter, a spin-off, a guide-in, if you will. It's good. I'll give it a thumbs up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a ship to catch.
The boss afraid somebody's gonna steal a bunch of frozen nerves?
It ain't the nerves he's got us guarding, you idiot.
You don't have to get mean, I'm new. They don't tell me much.